Our next speaker is Ahmed Rehab, Executive Director of cair-chicago.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me. I want to thank the committee, Chairwoman Rodriguez Sanchez, and Alderman Lopez for the invitation and for your leadership. My name is Ahmed Rehab. I'm the Executive Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations here in Chicago, a civil rights organization representing Muslim communities and other minorities in the city. It is a chapter and office of a national organization that is the largest Muslim civil rights organization in the country. I'm here in my capacity both as a leader in the civil rights movement for 20 years now and a leader of the Muslim American community here in the Chicagoland area, speaking from my expertise and experience in both fields, both areas. There are two things to discuss when we're talking about what is happening with Mahmoud Khalil and other students and other immigrants, green card holders, visa holders, etc., particularly as it relates to the Israel-Palestine situation. There's the content of the speech, and there's the principle of the matter. Let me begin with the content for a second. I want you to imagine 174 children filling this room. Seat them wherever you like. Some of them will have to stand. It'll be a full house. That's how many children were killed just yesterday. Not 50 years ago, not 100 years ago, not last year, just yesterday, in the very thick of this conversation, by the state of Israel, on the orders of its Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. And many more hundreds were killed. I'm just mentioning the children, because there's no question about whether they're terrorists. There isn't a question about civilians being terrorists either, but let's just make it very simple and clear. Now, this is not something that happened in a vacuum. It's been happening for the last year and a half. As a matter of fact, between 60,000 and 160,000 civilians have been killed, according to which reports you look at, in what has been deemed a genocide by the United Nations, by Amnesty International, by Human Rights Watch, by Israeli genocide experts and others. I say this because that is what Mahmoud Khalil and others have been standing up against. That is what they've been protesting. That is what the student encampments have been about. And they've been Muslims and Palestinians, whites, blacks, Latinos, Asians, and Jews in the leadership, in the front lines of this American movement, student movement against genocide committed by a foreign government that has been using our tax dollars to kill innocent people. So what we're seeing is gaslighting. This person who should be receiving an award for the human rights advocacy that he's doing in a very difficult environment is being penalized by a weaponized immigration system to politically persecute him and render him a political prisoner. He was abducted, he was detained without due process, without a crime, not charged with a crime. As was mentioned, it is simply that his actions, his speech, is disliked by those in power. That is what we see previously in the Soviet Union, in communist China, in Russia, in Assad's Syria. That is not what the United States of America is about, and what we're seeing now is a threat to bring us into space that we've never been in, at the behest of essentially lobby groups that serve a foreign agenda. And what we're seeing today, and this is very important to understand, is the deliberate conflation of standing up against genocide and human rights abuses with anti-Semitism. And I mentioned, as a civil rights leader in the city, I've had the pride and the honor of fighting not just against Islamophobia and racism, but also anti-Semitism, hand in hand with my Jewish colleagues. And so we know the difference between actual bigotry against Jews that generalizes against them and the criticism of the actions of adults who are responsible human beings who hold political and public office. The latter will never be deemed a form of bigotry. It is holding them accountable for their choices and their actions. It does not append their actions to their religion or identity, but to their souls and their own decision-making. And so what we are seeing, and I want to be very clear, is a direct attack on American democracy, namely agenda-driven, often foreign agenda-driven lobby groups attempting to and often succeeding in weaponizing U.S. taxpayer-funded government agencies and entities, institutions, to isolate, falsely accuse, and criminalize Americans for the critique of war crimes in Gaza. These entities and agencies and institutions include the White House itself, the Senate, the House, ICE, the FBI, the Justice Department, and the Department of Education. And there are groups here in Chicago and elsewhere that are also mobilizing to turn schools and universities against their students in the same way that they've turned the government against its citizens for the mere critique of a foreign government killing innocent people. That is what we're facing. And so I fully support this resolution. I think it is a moral imperative on all of us to demand the release of this political prisoner, to speak out against the weaponization of government, of the immigration system, to penalize people for their political speech because the president doesn't like it, and to ensure that we all stand against forms of bigotry, but not to conflate the actions and the accountability and the responsibility of people with their identities. Anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. Let that be very clear. Thank you very much.
Ahmed, do you have anything on solidarity besides what Ed has shared?
Yes, thank you for that. I think it's really important for us to understand what's truly at stake. What's at stake is, again, the weaponization of our government, our taxpayer-funded government, to attack citizens or residents or others whose political opinions those in power don't like. And I want to add this, and I think many people don't know this, but Mahmoud Khalil's name was provided to the government by a third party. And these third parties, including Bitar, which is a well-known Zionist organization that has admitted to giving tens of thousands of names to the White House and to the government, is a very scary situation. I mean, we're talking brown shirts back in the 20s and 30s in Germany. We're talking about a group of people who are actively and publicly stating that they will weaponize the government to arrest and deport or otherwise penalize those whom they don't like. And the government plays along without any sort of oversight or any regulatory practices. And so there's constitutional abuses, but beyond that, there's this chilling effect on the street, on campuses, in our daily lives. I read yesterday about a Mexican family that the parents were on their way to attend a very important emergency medical procedure for their daughter who had a brain tumor. They were arrested on the way to that procedure and removed. 4 of their children are American citizens. That's the Orwellian environment in which we live. Ed is right. This isn't just about Mahmoud Khalil. Bullies don't stop when they have one success. Today we're talking about human rights terrorism, because that's all he is a human rights advocate. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about abortion rights terrorism, and climate activism terrorism, and gender rights activism terrorism. And the list will go on. They can slap the word terrorism on any political opinion they don't like and penalize it. I want to stress, and the good alderman here who left his feet away from us, but I feel and know that he didn't hear a word we said. And not just because I saw him fumbling on his phone the whole time and then leaving it after his screed, but because he basically used the time that he had to justify genocide and to justify constitutional abuses using the code word, the magical word Hamas. Because of that word, genocide is acceptable. Because of that word, constitutional abuses be damned, or constitutional rights be damned. This is really very, very dangerous. Yes, of course, if we were attacked by terrorists, we would fight back as America, but guess what? If we were occupied by a foreign military and our rights were abused, we would also fight back. And yes, of course, hostages needs to be returned from both sides, as you mentioned, Chairwoman. And there's thousands, by the way, on the Israeli side that are held, that were apprehended during the genocide and even before, many of whom are children and some of whom are American citizens. And finally, this is about the principle. It's not about the content. I'm not here to try to compel him or anyone else to agree with me on the matter. People are entitled in this country to their political opinions, even if they're sordid and terrible, as his are, in my opinion. What we're talking about here is that he has the right, and I have the right, to have these opinions without punishment from the White House or extrajudicial penalizing from those in power, without due process. That's what this resolution is really about. It's about protecting residents, citizens, and subjects of this country from these governmental abuses. In Skokie, and I'll close with this, in the 70s, when there was a march by the KKK, and this is a Jewish-heavy area at the time, at least, and maybe it still is now, the ACLU, sitting to my left, they fought for the right to do so And by the way, many of those attorneys were Jewish American attorneys in the ACLU, and many of the donors were Jewish American donors. They didn't do this because they agreed with the KKK wearing Nazi uniforms and expressing fascism in a place where many are Holocaust survivors. It's because they believed in the importance of the principle that in this country, you can express your political opinion, whether we agree with it or not, and we can use our own freedoms to push back and explain and why these opinions are problematic. And that's exactly what we're here to promote. Freedom of expression and protections for residents and citizens against the weaponization of government by third parties to do their ugly foreign lobbyist bidding. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ahmed, do you have something to close?
Just to close, I want to emphasize that what you are attempting to do is not weaponize City Hall to do this or that, but rather to speak up as elected officials to de-weaponize what the government is doing to its citizens and residents, to penalize them for their political positions. And secondly, I think it's pretty clear for all that genocide is bad, that protests are good and are allowed in this country, constitutional rights are a good thing, etc. The only reason why there are debates is because of the conflation that happens using three main buzzwords that we have to be very careful about. The first, you throw in Hamas, and these are the same words that justified the genocide to begin with, the same words that shut down the rightful and peaceful student protests that are an American pastime since Vietnam and before and after, and that are attempting to shut down this resolution. The first is Hamas. Just throw that word out, everything falls apart. There's no more logic, there's no more debate. The second is anti-Semitism. Now, obviously, again, we all, including cair-chicago, agree that bigotry against Jews is a bad thing and we all stand against it. But what the attempts here are is to say that criticism of Israel and its government and military is anti-Semitic, therefore there should be no more discussion on the matter, shut it down. And that's what put Mahmoud Khalil in the cell that he's in right now, is that very same canard that was used. And then lastly, is when we're talking about that, we're talking about terrorism. And again, with terrorism, there are objective legal standards. This word is thrown around willy-nilly. It is rhetorical, oftentimes in its definition. It is extremely dangerous for us to even allow a conversation to happen in that space unless it is a legal conversation with legal standards of that definition. In the case of Mahmoud Khalil, he was never charged with terrorism because there's no evidence of his connection as such. We're talking about material support, which means goods, services, information. No evidence of any of that. So what you're left with is the rhetorical side, which is subjective and can't be proven or disproven because it's rhetorical in nature. So in any further conversations we are having, I think as leaders in this space, I want us to be very clear about how these concepts and words are thrown around to terrorize, if I may say, and intimidate us into not doing the right thing. Thank you for your leadership.